She entered barefoot. The silk brushed the floor like mist, and each step echoed on the marble as if the temple breathed with her. No one dared speak her name, but everyone knew her when she passed, as if an ancient goddess had returned to claim what had been taken from her. Esther, not just a woman, a seed of revolution planted where no one expected it, in the beating heart of the most luxurious empire of antiquity. It was night, and Susa's court burned with wine, desires, and alliances sewn into purple linen sheets. The king's eyes roamed faces like one unhurriedly hunting, but there, standing on the threshold, between the columns that guarded the harem like a labyrinth of unfulfilled promises, was she, the orphaned daughter of an exiled people, with the beauty of 1,000 queens and the silence of one who knows more than she lets on. Her perfume was not made solely of myrrh, but of purpose. Her gaze did not ask, it commanded. And when he bowed before the throne, it wasn't submission, it was strategy. The ancient world, forged by wars and blood pacts, didn't know it was being rewritten at that moment, because Esther didn't come to please, she came to save. With her skin anointed and her mind sharp as a royal decree, she chose the most dangerous path, entering the chamber of power unarmored, with naked courage and faith as her shield. And from there, no one would emerge unscathed. But what no one ever told, neither the scribes nor the priests, is that behind the golden veils and the scrolls that extol her courage, Esther carried an ancient secret, passed from woman to woman, from the concubines of Babylon to the silenced matriarchs of the desert. A forbidden knowledge, shrouded in oils, chants, and strategies that men never understood, but which shaped empires in the dark. They say that what truly saved the Hebrew people was not just their beauty, nor their boldness before the king, but a pact sealed in silence with unnamed forces within a temple where only women entered, and where the fate of the kingdom was molded like clay in the hands of a prophetess. The true story of Esther is not only found in scripture, it is between the lines, in the obscure rituals, in the whispers between pillows and purple curtains, where faith mingled with seduction and the sacred danced with the sensual. At the end of this video, you will discover what really made Esther win, and why, to this day, no one dares to tell the whole truth. Before the scepter rises, before fate is sealed in silence, show that you are on the side of the hidden voices of history. Leave your like as if defying a decree, and subscribe now before they erase this secret from the scriptures. The year is uncertain, lost among calendars erased by the conquests and fires of time. But the walls of Susa still whisper. Their stones, scorched by sun and wine, have seen more than kings. In the heart of Persia, an empire so vast that its messengers took weeks to traverse it, luxury was as dense as the golden dust that covered the columns. The royal palace was not made of stone alone. It was built on a silent pact between pleasure and dominion, between beauty and control. In every corridor, a tapestry woven by foreign hands. In every room, an invisible altar to the vanity of men. And there, among inner courtyards where fountains gushed water scented with saffron and pomegranate, women waited, not for love, but by choice. Some came from conquered lands, others were offered as living alliances, gold coins in the shape of bodies. King Ahasuerus was more than a monarch. He was a god incarnate in the imagination of his subjects, surrounded by eunuchs, scribes, and shadows. His throne rested on 7 emerald-studded steps. Above him, a canopy of peacock feathers. Below, hundreds of watchful eyes waiting for the slightest gesture. A look could exalt, a wave could kill. But even there, in the center of the world, where no feminine plea echoed without royal permission, a young woman stepped through the curtains with a name hidden on her lips and a secret in her veins. Her true name, Hadassah, was whispered only in childhood prayers, but there, before the golden gates of the harem, she would become Esther. Esther didn't arrive shouting. She was poured into the palace like oil poured on a sacred altar. Slowly, silently, irresistibly. While others competed with jewels and dances, she learned to observe. She sensed who was lying, who was afraid, who was manipulating. Her ears absorbed more than carpets absorbed perfumes. Each concubine, each general, each servant revealed more to her than they would have liked, and even without knowing it, they all bowed, not to her body, but to her destiny. In a land where men decided wars with raised cups, Esther prepared for hers, not with weapons, but with presence, not with threats, but with mystery. because deep down she knew that to change history, all she had to do was enter the right place, with the right beauty, at the right time. The royal harem was not merely a space of seclusion, it was a machine of silences and invisible games where power didn't roar, it whispered. Behind the perfumed walls of Susa, there was an architecture that obeyed not just stone and mortar, but the secret desires of an empire that tamed female bodies to shape political destinies. The columns supporting the high ceiling were adorned with carvings of lions and lilies, symbols of royalty and fertility, as if the entire space were suspended between instinct and hope. The polished marble reflected not only the women's bare feet, but their fears, their ambitions, their hidden pacts. Nothing there was left to chance. The corridor leading to the king's chamber was built like a spiritual funnel, wide at the entrance, narrow as a judgment at the end. And in the center of this sculpted labyrinth, amid Persian tapestries and sandalwood-laden breezes, lay the sacred chamber of decision, the king's bed. But before reaching it, there were rooms that served as hidden trials. The Hall of Seven Nights, for example, was a circular space where the chosen ones remained for 7 days under the watchful eye of the palace elders. There, more than beauty was tested. It was endurance. The woman who didn't cry, didn't fear, and didn't talk too much earned the right to continue. And there was the Chamber of Essences, a dark, damp room with lamps hanging from bronze chains. In the center, an alabaster altar with dozens of carved vials. Each perfume had a name, a purpose, a function: to seduce, to lull, to illuminate, to subdue. There, women were taught that the right fragrance could make a king forget a war treaty or a death decree. The architecture didn't just hide, it educated. The floor itself, made of mosaics of stones brought from Ethiopia and Babylon, represented ancient constellations, suggesting that to walk, there was to step into destiny. Every stone beneath Esther's feet whispered, "You are being seen." The ceiling of the main chamber had a circular opening, through which moonlight fell directly onto the center of the royal bed, as if heaven itself blessed or judged each night. It was on this sacred and sensual stage that Esther would have to perform. But unlike the others, she was not distracted by luxury nor enchanted by veils. She saw in the onyx walls the windows draped with blue linen curtains and the reflecting pools, not beauty, but the labyrinth. And those who understand the labyrinth do not get lost. They guide others. It was there in the calculated geometry of pleasure and power that Esther silently traced her own maps. And while men thought they ruled, she already walked among the invisible structures of true authority, that which is built with time, silence, and hidden purpose. In the palace of Susa, the oldest war was fought not with swords, but with averted glances and calculated smiles. The female court was a living web, where every gesture could signify an offer, a threat, or a silent treaty. Their alliances were not written on papyrus, but sealed amid veils, perfumes, and nights shared with the king. Women from distant lands, Egyptian, Greek, Hindu, Arabian, were not there by chance. They had been sent as flesh and blood ambassadors, bearers of invisible emblems, chosen not by those they loved, but by those they represented. The queen was not merely a consort, she was a living frontier between empires, a guarantee of peace or a seed of conflict. Each woman in the harem brought a dialect, a secret, an agenda. Among them, hierarchies existed sharper than the knives of the king's servants. The first wives had their own rooms and designated jewels. Favorites sometimes received smaller palaces, exclusive servants, even advice in the royal ear. But what united them all was a raw, silent awareness. They weren't there just to seduce. They were there to win. Some formed discreet alliances, exchanging favors and information like rare coins. Others set traps, spread rumors, and corrupted servants. It was an ancient game of survival, where beauty was merely the gateway. The rest was pure strategy. Esther, upon arriving, perceived this chessboard with painful clarity. She was a foreigner among foreigners, but unlike many, she had not been trained since childhood to seduce a king. She carried a dangerous truth, her Hebrew origins, and that was enough to make any alliance a sentence. Therefore, her silence was not shyness, it was calculation. While others presented themselves with dances and gifts, Esther listened. She observed the bonds between the women, who whispered to whom, who disappeared for days, who returned with downcast eyes and necks covered in new necklaces. She noticed who wept at night and who laughed in the morning. She stood before a battlefield where armies wore silk instead of armor, but amidst the silent chaos, Esther formed an alliance that could not be seen, with the shadows, with the rejected servants, with the forgotten, elderly, with those who no longer had beauty to compete with, but carried wisdom hidden in their eyes. It was with these that she crafted her strategy, not with words, but with simple, discreet gestures that went unnoticed by the king, but not by the eyes of fate. While the harem burned with disputes over knights and titles, Esther forged what no other dared, an alliance with the invisible. She didn't just want the king's love, she wanted the power to reverse a 1,000-year-old sentence. And to do so, she would use every thread in that tapestry of feminine alliances, even the most hidden, even the most dangerous. Before any woman could present herself to the king, there was a cycle of preparation that resembled more a sacred rite than a simple beautification. It wasn't just vanity, it was initiation. For 12 months, the selected young women immersed themselves in a regime of slow and meticulous transformation, as if their bodies were temples being purified to receive something divine, or perhaps to conceal the profane. 6 months of myrrh oils, 6 months of balms, perfumes, incense, and aromatic unguents. Each day was an offering to the mirror, to touch, to the absolute control of one's own magnetism. It wasn't just about cleansing the skin, but about erasing the former woman. 12 months to dissolve identity and be reborn as a mythical figure, prepared to enter the presence of the God King. The baths were silent ceremonies. Cauldrons of steaming water were perfumed with flowers from secret Mesopotamian gardens. Inside, the young women were stripped not only of their clothes, but of their memories, their voices, and the land from which they came. Experienced female hands ran linen cloths soaked in hot oil over their skin. Their nails were polished with pearl dust. Their hair was braided with silver and honey threads, let loose only on performance nights. The purification was not merely sensory, it was symbolic. It was necessary to erase the traces of the past to fit the eyes of the present. Esther went through it all, but unlike the others who allowed themselves to be molded like alabaster statues in the hands of royal artisans, she absorbed every detail with an alert mind. She knew these practices didn't just come from Persia. There were remnants of arcane traditions, of Sumerian priestesses, of forgotten goddesses, of sorceresses from the dawn of the world. Behind the touch of the ointments, there were intentions. Behind every perfume, a power. And she didn't just surrender to the process, she deciphered the code. The older women who oversaw the rituals were guardians of a wisdom men could never access. They were like priestesses disguised as servants, teaching the young women not only how to move before the king, but how to breathe so his heart beat differently. They taught them to hold their gaze when necessary, and lower it just enough so that doubt becomes desire. Esther learned that seduction wasn't about offering. It was about hiding. It was about knowing when to back off so the other could advance. It was about leaving questions hanging in the air with the scent of their bodies. It was about turning silence into a promise. Thus, Esther not only purified herself, she armed herself. She transformed each bath into a rite, each oil into a shield, each fragrance into an oracle. While others awaited their night with the king as a destiny, she planned it as a portal, because true seduction doesn't begin with touch. It begins in the invisible, where desire meets mystery and beauty bows before intention. What if the war was won with perfume, silence, and lowered eyes? Comment below, which of these secret rituals do you believe most shaped a queen's destiny? The royal chamber was not just a room, it was a temple, a secret altar where the king ceased to be a god and became a man, vulnerable, impulsive, blinded by desire. There, where official history dared not enter, the architecture of seduction revealed its most ancient symbols. The cedar doors opened with the groan of the wood, as if the place itself breathed, and the air that invaded the lungs was not the same as that of the rest of the palace. It was dense, laden with spices, moistened with promises and sins, mixed with myrrh, black frankincense, southern cinnamon, and Ethiopian amber. There was something in the air that made the eyes heavy, and judgments evaporate. The floor was covered in overlapping furs and rugs, as if each step were a deliberate sinking. Feet no longer touched reality. The curtains, sewn with gold and purple threads, filtered the light from the lamps, casting shadows that shifted with the wind, and the royal bed, in the center of the room, was elevated like a sacrificial altar, where the body offered was not just a woman's but the very control of the empire. Every detail had been considered by invisible hands, trained to create not a space of repose, but a ritualistic setting where pleasure transformed into worship. Esther entered there for the first time as if crossing a veil between worlds. She wasn't just the woman before the king, she was the priestess before a desecrated altar. While others trembled in anticipation, she controlled her breathing so that the rhythm of the room adjusted to hers. She walked as if treading on prophecies. She didn't rush her gestures. She didn't exaggerate her smile. She let the silence speak louder than any words. And as she approached the bed, she didn't lie down. She waited. She made the space between her and the king an invisible tension, like a bowstring about to snap. The king watched her, yes, with the gaze of one who chooses. But that night, he was the one chosen. Because Esther didn't offer a body, she offered mystery. And there is no man, no matter how powerful, who doesn't bow before mystery. The sound of the harp in the background marked the time as if each note were an incantation. There was wine on the table, but she didn't drink. There were ripe fruits, but she didn't touch them. She was the center of the scene, and she knew that a king bored by 1,000 women would only surrender to one who refused to be like the others. The king's chamber was, for many, the end of the journey. For Esther, it was the beginning of war. There, under the dim light and the slowly burning perfume, she began to write her plan, a plan without weapons, without shouting, without armies, just presence, because there are women who conquer kingdoms with words, but there are others who change the fate of nations with a simple gesture, a look, a silence. And that night, the throne was not in the palace hall, it was lying on cushions, and Esther, without raising her voice, began to reign. No one spoke of it aloud, but every woman in the harem knew. There was more venom in women's smiles than in the silver cups that circulated in the king's hands. The war that raged there didn't leave blood on the ground. It scarred the soul. It was silent, precise, stitched together with sidelong glances, insinuated words, coldly rehearsed gestures. It wasn't about hatred, it was about survival. Because in Susa, a single night of carelessness could mean exile, oblivion, or the slow death of importance. There were concubines who spoke little, but knew how to listen to the walls. Others feigned sweetness, but corrupted servants to plant bugs where silence was supposed to reign. The harem was a chess game without a board, where each woman was both a piece and a player. Alliances lasted as long as a favor, betrayals an instant. There were invisible codes, languages made of looks and absence. A woman who failed to show up for a communal bath without justification became a target of speculation. A woman who exchanged perfume for a rare one generated suspicion. Everything was watched, everything was manipulated, and the king, blinded by privilege, believed he ruled over pacified women, unaware that behind every submissive gesture, meticulous, calculations were being made. Esther, unlike the favorites who reveled in small victories, chose to remain on the sidelines. Her absence from the most mundane events wasn't a sign of contempt, it was a tactic. She didn't reveal information, but she didn't hide either. Her enigmatic posture was disconcerting. Some women tried to approach, disguised as curiosity. Esther smiled little. She said even less. Her weapon was mystery, and that made her dangerous, because in a place where everyone fought for attention, the one who asked for nothing won everything. The maids knew everything, and Esther knew they knew, so she spoke to them as equals. She shared bread, asked about their families, listened to stories. She gained trust, and with trust, she gained information. She knew who cried at night and who faked orgasms to appear loved. She knew who had become pregnant by the king and lost the child in silence. She knew who kept amulets hidden under their robes. She knew, and knowledge is the sharpest sword of all. The most dangerous rivalry wasn't between the favorites. It was between those who had been forgotten, but still dreamed of returning to the royal bed. Wounded women are the ones who bleed the most, and many longed to see Esther stumble. They tried to undermine her with whispers in the king's ear, spreading the word that she came from a cursed people, hiding secrets of blood and faith. But she resisted, and the more she resisted, the more the king became enchanted. And the more the king became enchanted, the more the invisible blades sharpened around her. In that war without soldiers, without trumpets, without flags, Esther stood firm, because she wasn't fighting to defeat others. She was fighting to save those outside, to protect a lineage, a legacy, a stifled faith, and because of that, she couldn't make mistakes. Every step was calculated like a shaman calculates the wind. Every word was measured like a priest weighs incense. Esther didn't want the throne. She wanted the decree, and to reach it, she would have to cross that minefield of feminine desires, ancestral jealousies, and intrigues that poisoned even the purest silk. Within the walls of Susa, the female womb was not just a place of creation. It was strategic territory. Each womb a promise of the future, each pregnancy a political ploy. The king possessed women like one who collects kingdoms. But children, oh, children were much more than offspring. They were levers of power. A woman pregnant by the king gained position. A woman who gave birth to a son gained influence, and a woman whose son survived gained access to the corridors where true government took shape. The harem then became not only a temple of pleasure, but an arena of invisible inheritances. Royal children were raised far from their fathers, but not far from their mothers, and the mothers knew it wasn't milk that shaped their heirs, it was words. It was the constant gaze, the ritual touch, the repetition of stories. Each mother vied, without declaring it, for a place in the empire's future. They shaped their children as pieces of a hidden plan, where love was simulated with devotion and obedience was intertwined with ambition. Some raised children to obey, others to dominate, and there were those who, unable to bear children, sought to adopt the palace orphans, transforming them into extensions of their will. Because in Susa, even motherhood was a maneuver. Esther knew her time was short. She knew she would not have children out of privilege, but out of mission. She carried the awareness that the Hebrew womb was sacred, but also marked by centuries of persecution. And yet, her body was the only link between her ancestral lineage and her chance of survival against an empire that wanted them erased. She didn't dream of children to adorn the palace. She dreamed of children who carried the blood of resistance, and this made her more dangerous than any crowned queen. The silent struggle for future. Generations took place in the shadows of the corridors. A glance between servants could indicate a pregnancy had been discovered. A stained sheet could mean the end of a promise. And each whispered miscarriage, natural or induced, was followed by weeks of tension. Infertility was a deadly secret, birth a calculated spectacle, and love, well, love was a luxury few allowed themselves. Palace mothers raised their children with guarded tenderness, with affection stifled by the need for survival. Some women placed amulets on their children's clothes. Others drew ancient symbols with oil on their babies' foreheads. Esther observed everything. She didn't judge, she learned. And I knew that education wasn't just about words. A child who watched his mother struggle in silence learned more than a son who heard stories of glory. And so, even before giving birth, Esther was already silently gestating, not a life, but a destiny. The destiny of a people, of a lineage, of an ancient promise made in the shadow of the stars. Because for her, the future wasn't in the king's hands. It was in the arms of the women who held tomorrow in their cradle. And no mother is as dangerous as the one who raises a child to change history. Some empires are born in the womb, but are guided by the hands that rock the cradle. In your view, who really shaped the destiny of Persia, the king, or the mothers hidden behind the veils? Within the silent walls of the harem, where bodies rested on cushions, the gods never slept. They lurked, camouflaged in the eyes of the concubines, hidden among the threads of necklaces, embedded in the talismans sewn into the hems of dresses. The palace of Susa, though officially dedicated to the gods of Persia, Mitra, Ahura Mazda, Anahita, was in fact a hidden sanctuary for hundreds of foreign deities, hailing from the lands from which the women had been taken, offered, abducted, or promised. Each woman brought with her not only her language and her lineage, but her faith, and she didn't leave it outside. She hid it within her body. Among the concubines, secret rituals were practiced. One lit candles to a Phoenician goddess of fertility, murmuring ancient words while the others slept. Another whispered Egyptian chants before a small statuette of Isis, kept under a perfume chest. Some practiced silent prayers while washing their hair, transforming the water into liturgy. It was a fragmented, clandestine spirituality woven into everyday life, because there, where the king believed himself to be a center of worship. There was a multitude of scattered faiths that did not belong to him. The gods of the earth were never unique, and the women knew this better than any priest. Esther, with her Hebrew heritage, could not reveal the name of her God, but neither could she kneel before altars disguised as beauty. She carried the certainty of a single creator, invisible, jealous, and powerful, and, at the same time, the burden of living surrounded by deities who demanded silent offerings. She saw with open eyes what others ignored. She felt the weight of syncretism suffocating the air, as if the palace were an impure temple, where every belief vied for space on the same bed of seduction. The king, unknowingly, slept on crusader altars. His body was anointed with oils dedicated to gods he didn't recognize. His nights of pleasure became silent pacts with spiritual powers that eluded him, and each royal orgasm could signify an offering, an invocation, a transfer of dominion. The empire, while growing in size, fragmented in faith, and the walls that were supposed to protect the religious purity of the throne were already stained by a mosaic of occult rituals that no one could control. Esther understood the risk. She knew that the mixing of beliefs was not just a theological issue, but a spiritual rift. An empire that slept with all the gods would end up serving none. Susa's soul was being diluted, and between the veils, the silks, and the smiles, she saw clearly that the palace was no longer a place of authority, but a field of spiritual dispute where the invisible became increasingly present. She couldn't destroy the gods of others, but she could keep hers silent, like a hidden ember, ready to rekindle. Because amidst the sacred confusion, the worship disguised as beauty, the syncretism that confused the eyes and the heart, Esther knew that the only faith capable of saving was not the most showy, it was the most steadfast. And while everyone else sought enchantments, she kept her altar alive, even if hidden. No empire falls overnight. It rots first from within, and no one notices. Persia, in the eyes of the ambassadors, remained grand. Its halls glittered with gold. Its banquets were lavish, its walls unassailable. But the perfume wafting from Susa was no longer the same. It was sweeter, denser, more cloying, like fruit ripened beyond its time, hiding the taste of decay beneath a still beautiful rind. At the center of it all, the king lost himself, a once cunning man, now intoxicated by endless nights, by women who took turns like endless offerings, by pleasures that had become routine and addiction. He no longer ruled, he floated, and each time a decree was signed amidst the wine and delirium, the people groaned louder, taxes rose, sentences became more arbitrary, justice trembled. The squares, once vibrant, now echoed with murmurs of dissatisfaction. But none of these sounds reached the palace carpets. Inside all was silence, or music. Music that drowned out the ruin, music that cradled the fall. Esther noticed. She walked between columns and saw tired servants, drowsy soldiers, distracted ministers, and she felt that the throne had become a cushion, that the scepter weighed less than a kiss. The thirst for conquest had been exchanged for a thirst for wine, justice for delirium, and the people, the Hebrew people, targets of contempt and persecution, were now in the hands of a weak man, manipulated, fickle, corrupted by his own fantasies. One decree was enough to condemn all his people. One whisper, one lie, and the sentence would fall like a blade. Seduction, once a tool of power, now became the king's vice. He no longer distinguished love from obsession, desire from need. He sought more and more, felt less and less. It was a royal body governed by impulses, and the advisors, sensing the fragility, began to hover like vultures over the carcass of the empire. One of them, Haman, was rising rapidly, a cold, calculating man disguised as loyalty, yet thirsty for supremacy. And amidst his sweet words to the royal ear, the plan of extermination grew, a silent plan, a plan that would bear the king's signature and the blood of the Hebrews. Esther, upon hearing the rumors, understood. Pleasure has a price, and when you pay with the spirit of an entire people, the price is the very soul of the kingdom. The palace, once a sanctuary, was now a luxury brothel. The gods were silent, men were blind, and the people were forgotten. Beauty without purpose becomes a curse, pleasure without measure becomes punishment, and power without lucidity becomes a gateway to chaos. Esther knew it was no longer enough to seduce. It was time to awaken. But to do so, she would have to cross the temple of decadence barefoot, her face clean of perfume, with the firm voice of one who no longer asks, commands. Because if the king had sunk into illusion, she still carried the purpose. And in the silence before the catastrophe, a woman would rise. That night, the palace of Susa seemed asleep. But between the corridors that separated the throne from death, destiny walked barefoot. Esther wore the simplest linen, no jewelry, no perfume. She didn't need them, because now she didn't just represent the chosen woman, she represented an entire people. Her eyes didn't shine with vanity, they sparkled with urgency. The silence that surrounded her was the same as that of the prophetesses before the sacrifice. And while the guards hesitated to block her, her presence imposed itself as if carrying the light of a name that could not be spoken. The king, intoxicated by the habit of seeing women beg for knights, was disconcerted. There was Esther, and she wasn't asking. She was announcing. The moment of truth wasn't a scream. It was a sentence, whispered, precise, eternal. If I perish, I perish. With those words, she tore apart centuries of submission and placed herself above fear. The room trembled, the scepter tilted, and the empire in that instant was moved by something no scribe would dare write. The strength of a woman who understood that power lies not in being accepted, but in being undeniable. The secret the scribes never told, the one we promised to reveal, is that Esther didn't win solely because of her courage, nor her beauty, nor her eloquence before the king. Esther won because she activated an ancient power that lives among silenced women, a power that doesn't need altars, because it is an altar, that doesn't need crowns because it is lineage, a power passed down in the touch of matriarchs, in the gaze of midwives, in the songs whispered within the walls of the harem. Esther knew this power, because even before entering the palace she had been prepared, not with swords, but with wisdom. Her strategy was written between the lines of the scrolls that men's hands ignored. She understood that to change an empire, one doesn't shout, one enters. And once inside, one observes, one listens, one acts at the precise moment, like the priestesses of old, like the forgotten judges, like the prophetesses silenced by history. Esther didn't invent feminine power. She simply stripped it of its disguises. And the price? Yes, there was a price, there always is, because every woman who dares to break the established order carries within her the curse of discomfort. Esther was remembered, but never understood. She was exalted, but her weapons were hidden. They reduced her story to beauty because they feared her mind. They revered her risk but buried her strategy, because the world still doesn't know how to deal with women who save without swords, who fight without shouting, who win without spilling blood. And we who read her today in the pages of Scripture forget to listen to her with our souls, because Esther is not just a character. She is a mirror, she is a symbol, she is a warning. She reminds us that empires fall, kings fall asleep, priests become corrupt, but the hidden power of women who stand up for justice remains awake, and that sometimes it only takes one, just one, to reverse the destiny of a nation. The Bible as you've never seen it before. The hidden truth revealed. If something in you still feels different after this story, it's because not every secret is buried. Some are just waiting for the right look. Esther was not just remembered, she was unearthed from between the lines, rescued from the shadows where so many others had been hidden. If this revelation touched you, leave your like as someone who gives voice to what was silenced, and subscribe, because there are other names, other plots, other crowns lost in time. The next story that appears now does not ask for permission. She invades, she exposes, and maybe it will transform you. Click if you're ready to hear what's never been said out loud.